with the great Sean McAdam of Mass Live, who joins me right now here on the Christian Arcand Show. Mr. McAdam, how are we doing tonight?
I'm glad that the great radio moment was not Air Supply that you were referring to.
That was all young Thomas back there who really, I mean, Thomas is in college, so I don't even know where he found how he knows about Air Supply. How did you even know about that song?
First, I'm actually a college graduate now.
Excuse me. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I'm well cultured. My dad, he loves music. He made sure I had the right, made sure I had the right type of music.
There you go. He said, Tommy, you want to meet a girl, you put on some Air Supply.
It hasn't worked out too well.
That's all right.
Lee Anthony.
Anyway, Sean, music aside, this was one of the more impactful days, I would say. I was talking earlier about that 2014 trade deadline where they traded all of their starters and how crazy that was. And, you know, I don't know that even holds a candle to what we all went through yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, that, you know, going back to that trade with the Dodgers, that was a as advertised salary dump with some declining performances from Beckett and Carl Crawford, obviously. This was an impactful guy who was still producing at a high clip offensively, and it's hard to look at the return and say that they got anywhere close to near value on it. And you wonder what that lineup's going to be like for, you know, the foreseeable future, where you have essentially Trevor Story, Jarren Duran, and when he comes back, Willie Abreu, and everybody else is either a rookie or a journeyman.
Yeah, wow. You put it like that, it is a bit of a slap. And you know what's funny, Sean, is that like Abraham Toro and Romy Gonzalez, guys who have had to pick up the slack here now in the absence of Bregman, in the absence of Tristan Casas, have been playing pretty well. They've been giving you something.
Yeah, they have, and that's, you know, not meant as a slight to them. They have been, they've exceeded expectations, but they do have a track record and a history, and it's unlikely that they're going to maintain that level of performance for the rest of the year. There's a reason why these guys are in their late 20s and have moved around a little bit. And look, again, no knock on them. They're major league players, and they've exceeded expectations here and bailed them out when they didn't have a first or third baseman. But as I said, it's unlikely that that's going to continue for the entire year.
How much of the emphasis here and priority was placed on making sure that whoever they traded Rafael Devers to was going to take on all of his money? How high of a priority would you say that was, Sean?
I don't know how high a priority it was. I was told that the Red Sox had communicated to interested teams that they would take some of the money back to facilitate a deal. Now, it turns out they went for the deal in which they took exactly nothing back, but they had apparently communicated to other teams that they would be willing to retain some of Devers' salary in order to make a trade. And then they did not. So we can read into that whatever we wish to read into. But as I said, if that was the goal, then they should be honest about it, because if they had other options, it would seem almost by default that the return would have been better with or without retaining salary, because they frankly did not get a lot here. They got two pitchers at the major league level who are talented but are inconsistent and or haven't figured it out yet in Harrison's case. You had a number one pick from a year ago that people think could be a pretty good player in a couple of years, but that doesn't help them this year. And that's why the notion of, you know, taking two low-level prospects, however promising one of them might be, doesn't make a lot of sense when you're in the middle of your best stretch of the season and trying to continue that.
Were you on the plane when Devers got taken off the plane? Were you traveling with them?
I am not. Chris Smith is in Seattle for us, and he had flown out yesterday morning. The Red Sox do not allow the only media allowed on the charters are team broadcasters, so that wouldn't have been an option anyway. But he was apparently on the plane and had boarded, and then they informed him of the deal, and he came off. So that sounds pretty awkward. And, we'll know a little bit more in about a half hour when we have a Zoom call with both Sam Kennedy and Craig Breslow to explain their side of it.
Yeah, we certainly will. I'm very much looking forward to that and hearing what how they spin it and how they try and make this into a positive thing that happened here. But I think that we can all sort of look at this, Sean, as shocked and upset as we may be, or as I may be, and still understand the machinations that led to this and how Devers really from the first day of spring training was kind of set off on this path. If you had to guess, or if you know, when did the wheels really get in motion to get to this day? When did the idea of a Rafael Devers trade become something that could realistically happen?
Well, I don't know about a trade and when that first popped up on their radar, but I would say the seeds of this were sown in the off season when Devers questioned all the speculation about either Nolan Arenado or Alex Bregman, and the Red Sox foolishly said that, no, it's just media speculation. Don't pay any attention to it. And apparently when he asked that, the feeling was pessimistic among the front office that they were going to get either Arenado or Bregman. Bregman at the time was looking for a much longer deal, ended up settling for a higher AAV and some opt-outs on a shorter deal, but they were not optimistic they were going to get Bregman in January. And the Arenado thing, I don't know how serious they were there. It may have given them some leverage in terms of Bregman, but there may have been some hesitation to take on his money, given how he had been trending downward. Still, that is where the distrust began.
Excuse me.
And when Devers showed up in spring training, and 2 days later they're announcing the signing, it snowballed very quickly.
Yeah, certainly did. Now, you've covered Devers for his whole career. Considering what we all remember him as this sort of fresh-faced kid hitting home runs off Aroldis Chapman back when he got called up. I think he got called up right after Sandoval got DFA'd or released, but, right around that same time. And his personality being described by everybody as, this really sweet kid who's, got this big smile and he's really happy to be playing ball. Was there a point, over the last 7 years, where you noticed a change in his personality that sort of led to the behavior that we've seen over the last, this season and maybe even a little before that?
No, I think the thing that probably became more apparent in the last couple of years as he became the focus of the starting lineup and their best offensive player and ultimately their highest paid player, at least in terms of the contract value, was that he was never comfortable being the guy. He did not like speaking with the media. I don't think it necessarily had to do with the language issue. As you guys have seen, and I think as most fans know, you can conduct an informal conversation with him in English, but he's very self-conscious about being on camera and answering in English. He understands 95% of what you ask in English, doesn't need it translated. He's more comfortable answering in Spanish, and that's fine. But I think even beyond that, he did not like being team spokesman or face of the franchise or the guy facing out and representing the clubhouse. And by nature of the money that he was getting and his star power and his achievements, he was that. So there was a little bit of a conflict there. It was not unusual for him to say, have a big night. Media relations people would go over to his locker. Reporters would like to talk to you. He'd kind of roll his eyes and come over and answer questions and then have another good night the next night. And when a media relations person returned to say, reporters would like to speak to you, he said, no, I talked last night, as if that had anything to do with what happened in that night's game. And he was kind of the mind that, you get me once or twice a week and that's it, regardless of what happens on the field. And frankly, that's not realistic in today's game.
When we're talking with Sean McAdam from Mass Live right now here on the Christian Arcand Show, when Devers had his most recent outburst, there were players that reportedly walked by him and said, "Raffy, stop talking. Raffy, knock it off." Would you say that there were like a team Raffy in the clubhouse and, maybe another side that was kind of all done with him and his behavior? Would you say that the locker room was split at all over the Devers situation?
I'd say split would be an exaggeration.
Okay.
But there were, as I wrote, a few weeks ago, there were at least a couple of players in there who were disappointed that Devers hadn't stepped up and volunteered to try first base after Casas went down. I think the guys who have been around him longer and knew him and knew of his personality kind of shrugged it off and weren't terribly surprised, given that they knew how he felt about how things had transpired over the winter, and this was his way of protesting. There were some that weren't crazy about that and others that just didn't expect him to change.
What is the roster going to look like now? How is the first base, third base, DH situation? I think we have an idea of what it's going to look like, but how is this going to be implemented? Are we going to see Yoshida, for example?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. We'll see what Alex Cora says about that tonight in Seattle. He was healthy enough to DH in spring training. They wanted him to be able to throw, to be able to help out in the outfield. Now they need a DH. So I would expect that he would take that role, although how soon that's going to happen, I don't know. I think first and third is going to look much like it has in recent weeks, with either Toro and Gonzalez at first and either Toro or Meyer at third. You now have the luxury, either until Yoshida takes over full-time or even when he does, to mix in some of those guys as the DH. It might be an opportunity to have Roman Anthony DH occasionally and have an outfield of Duran, Rafaela, and Abreu when Abreu comes off the IL Friday. It does give them a lot of flexibility, but in no way is the production going to be equal to what they had with Devers.
Certainly not. And I think that combined with the financial flexibility that I'm hearing the Breslow apologists all coming up with is driving me, frankly, insane, Sean. I'm going nuts over here with the financial flexibility. Like, that's brought him anything
Well, the
here.
problem with the financial flexibility is you can't do anything with it in season.
Right.
Or it's hard to. I mean, you could end up doing what the Giants just did and taking a contract off the hands of a team that's looking to move one. But I can't think of another hitter, in that production category that would begin to replace it. I've been told that they are full steam ahead on the trade deadline, that they're going to add, that they know they have to replace Devers' bat. But I think that's easier said than done. I think ultimately the proof will be what they do in the offseason. Do they go after Kyle Tucker? Do they go after some of the real A-list free agents and reinvest that money? If they don't, people very much have the right to let them hear about it.
Certainly. The meeting, and we've talked about this a few times, but the meeting in Kansas City, the meeting that wasn't, with no Breslow, it was Cora, it was John Henry, and it was Rafael Devers. Nothing came from that, and you and I sort of mused about this. All right, well, you just had this big meeting with the big boss, and now here we are 2-3 weeks later, and you still haven't taken a ground ball at first base. If you had to sort of weigh that up with his outburst and the questioning of Craig Breslow, and maybe, which one of those two things had a tip the scale more towards this day getting here, which one would you say it is?
I would say the meeting with Henry, because it was an extraordinary effort and measure on his part to fly halfway across the country and meet with him and kind of implore him and say, look, we had an injury we didn't anticipate. We could use you at first base. We're paying you a lot of money. Will you give this a try? And I think we can surmise what Devers' answer was. And maybe the trade that happened last night began to germinate that day. It may have been Henry throwing up his hands and saying, we made this guy the highest paid player in franchise history, and now we can't get him to get on board and be a good teammate. I should add, I do know that one of the things they were concerned about was the precedent this was setting in front of Meyer, Anthony, and Campbell. And they worried about what was being conveyed to them. They're looking around and seeing the longest tenured, highest paid player in the clubhouse is essentially telling the principal owner to go fly a kite. And they worried that was going to be a bad culture-defining moment for some of the young players transitioning onto the team.
All right, last question, Sean. What does this all mean for Alex Cora? How does Cora handle this going forward? And should this be considered maybe some kind of message to him?
I don't think so. I see no evidence that Cora is on the hot seat at all here, particularly with how they've turned it around the last week and a half. Now, it may well be that minus Devers, the lineup stalls and they fall back into the kind of playing the same kind of baseball they were for the month leading up to it, in which case that's not good for him. But in the short term, it's a trade-off. He does not have an elite left-handed hitting run producer to build the lineup around. The positive for him is he's not managing the personalities and being in between and conveying one thing to him and reporting back to ownership. So that gets taken off his plate. But, you know, he's going to miss the production that he was getting from Devers, even if he might not miss the headaches that he sometimes provided.
That is the voice of Sean McAdam, Mass Live. Sean, great stuff as always. Thanks for making some time tonight.
My pleasure, Christian.
All right. Once again, Sean McAdam joining me here on the Christian Arcand Show.